In the blistering heat of a desert so vast it seemed to swallow the sky, there stood an old rancher by the name of Ezekiel Granger. His weathered face was etched with lines that told stories of countless sunrises and sunsets, each one more grueling than the last. The townsfolk often spoke of him in hushed tones, not out of respect, but out of mockery. They called his land cursed, a barren wasteland where nothing grew except thorns and despair. But little did they know, beneath the dusty surface of Ezekiel's ranch lay secrets that would change their lives forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dry earth as Ezekiel trotted along the edge of his property on his trusty mule, Samson. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush, and the wind carried whispers of a time long past. He paused for a moment, gazing at the horizon where the jagged peaks of the Black Rock Mountains pierced the heavens. His heart ached with memories of the days when his land had been lush and green, a place where cattle grazed freely and crops flourished under the golden rays of the sun. But those days were gone now, buried beneath years of drought and hardship. As he turned back toward the ramshackle barn that served as both shelter and storage, Ezekiel noticed something unusual, a faint glimmer among the rocks near the creek bed. It caught his eye like a beacon in the darkness, beckoning him closer. With a heavy sigh, he dismounted Samson and approached cautiously. The glimmer grew brighter as he neared, until finally he knelt down and brushed away the dirt covering it. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A vein of gold, shimmering like liquid fire in the fading light of day. Ezekiel's hands trembled as he reached out to touch it, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. For a moment, he wondered if this was some cruel trick of fate, a mirage conjured by his weary mind. But no, it was real. Unbelievable, yet undeniably true. He sat back on his heels, staring at the discovery before him, his heart pounding like a drum roll in the silence of the desert night. But news of such treasures does not stay hidden for long. By the next morning, word had spread through the small town of Redstone like wildfire. At first, the townsfolk refused to believe it. How could the old rancher, whose land they had ridiculed for years, suddenly uncover riches beyond imagination? They laughed at the notion, dismissing it as another tall tale spun by a desperate man clinging to hope. Yet curiosity gnawed at them, eating away at their skepticism until it became unbearable. A group of 5 men, 4 prospectors and 1 shopkeeper who fancied himself a treasure hunter, decided to investigate. They rode out to Ezekiel's ranch just as the sun began its ascent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. When they arrived, they found Ezekiel waiting for them, leaning casually against a fence post with a pipe clamped between his teeth. His expression was unreadable, neither welcoming nor hostile, but there was a glint in his eyes that suggested he expected them. "Well, Mr. Granger," drawled Jasper Hale, the leader of the group, tipping his hat slightly, "we heard tell you struck it rich. Is it true?" Ezekiel took a slow drag from his pipe, letting the smoke curl lazily into the air. "You'll see for yourselves," he replied, his voice gravelly with age and experience. Without another word, he led them to the spot by the creek where the golden vein gleamed invitingly in the sunlight. The men gasped audibly, their disbelief melting away like frost in the springtime. This wasn't just a rumor. It was tangible proof of fortune lying right before their very eyes. Greed flickered in their gazes, replacing the initial amusement they brought with them. One by one, they dismounted their horses and crowded around the site, inspecting the vein with eager hands. "This is unbelievable," muttered Silas Reed, the youngest of the group. His voice quivered with excitement, betraying the awe he felt despite trying to remain composed. Jasper nodded grimly. "It's enough to make a man forget all about honor and decency." His tone carried a warning, though whether it was directed at the others or himself remained unclear. Ezekiel watched them silently, his lips pressed into a thin line. He knew what greed looked like. It was written plainly on their faces, etched deep in their expressions. And while a part of him wanted to revel in their envy, another part bristled with unease. There was something about this land, something ancient and mysterious, that whispered warnings even as it offered promise. As the day wore on, the men set to work feverishly, determined to claim as much of the gold as possible. Picks and shovels rang out against the rocky terrain, disturbing the stillness of the desert. Dust filled the air, mingling with the sweat pouring from their brows. Despite the grueling labor, none of them complained, not even once. Each strike of their tools brought them closer to wealth, and that thought fueled their endurance. By late afternoon, they had uncovered a significant portion of the vein, piling the glittering nuggets onto blankets spread out beside them. The sight was intoxicating, almost hypnotic, drawing stares from everyone present. Even Ezekiel couldn't help but marvel at the sheer magnitude of it all. But amidst the jubilation, a shadow crept over the scene, darkening the edges of their joy. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A chill swept through the air, cutting through the oppressive heat of the desert. The wind picked up, carrying with it strange sounds, low moans and distant cries that echoed eerily across the empty expanse. The men exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter faltering as the reality of their situation sank in. "What was that?" asked Silas, his voice trembling slightly. "Probably just coyotes," dismissed Jasper, though his hand instinctively moved to grip the handle of his revolver. Still, the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing moment. It wasn't the cry of animals. It was something else entirely. Something human, yet not quite alive. Then came the storm. Dark clouds rolled in from nowhere, blotting out the sun and plunging the world into shadow. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the men as they scrambled to gather their tools and belongings. Rain poured down in torrents, turning the ground slick and treacherous beneath their boots. Thunder roared like the voice of an angry god, shaking the very foundations of the earth. Through the chaos, Ezekiel stood firm, his presence unwavering despite the tempest raging around him. He raised his arms to the heavens, shouting above the din, "You don't belong here. This land has its own rules, and you've broken them." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but the men paid them no heed. Driven by desperation, they continued their frantic efforts to secure the gold, oblivious of the danger closing in on them. And then, without warning, the ground beneath them gave way. A massive fissure split open in the earth, swallowing several of the men whole. Their screams reverberated through the valley, haunting and raw, before being silenced abruptly. The remaining two survivors clawed their way to safety, pale-faced and shaking, their sanity teetering on the brink. Among them was Jasper, who collapsed onto his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks as he stared at the gaping chasm where his friends and the gold had vanished. Ezekiel approached him slowly, his expression somber. "I warned you," he said quietly. "This land isn't cursed, it's protected, and those who disrespect it will pay dearly." Jasper didn't respond, unable to form coherent thoughts amidst the turmoil within him. Instead, he simply sat there, rocking back and forth as the storm gradually subsided, leaving behind an eerie calm that settled over the desolate landscape. When dawn broke the following morning, only Ezekiel remained on the ranch. The others had fled during the night, abandoning their dreams of fortune in exchange for survival. As he surveyed the damage wrought by the previous day's events, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Perhaps he should have warned them sooner, spared them from their folly. But then again, perhaps not. After all, sometimes lessons must be learned the hard way. And so, life returned to its usual rhythm on the old ranch. The sun rose and fell, casting long shadows across the arid plains. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, and the stars twinkled brightly in the endless night sky. Beneath the surface, however, the golden vein still lay buried, waiting patiently for someone brave or foolish, enough to disturb it once more. As the days turned into weeks, Ezekiel found himself reflecting on the events that had transpired. The storm had not only altered the landscape, but also left an indelible mark on his soul. He often wandered to the edge of the fissure, staring down into its depths, wondering about the lives lost and the gold now forever out of reach. Yet, despite the tragedy, there was a strange sense of peace that lingered in the air, as if the land itself had exhaled a sigh of relief. One evening, under the cover of a star-studded sky, Ezekiel sat by a small fire he had kindled near the creek. The flames danced softly, their light flickering against the rough contours of his face. It was then that he noticed a figure approaching from the distance, a lone traveler making their way across the desert. At first, he thought nothing of it. Wanderers were not uncommon in these parts. But as the figure drew closer, something about their gait caught his attention. There was a purposefulness in their stride, a determination that spoke of someone seeking answers rather than merely passing through. The traveler eventually reached the fire, revealing themselves to be a woman dressed in sturdy boots and a worn coat. Her hat shadowed her face, but her eyes glinted with intelligence and resolve. She tipped her hat slightly in greeting, before speaking in a voice steady yet tinged with curiosity. "Evening, Mr. Granger. Mind if I join you for a spell?" Ezekiel studied her for a moment, weighing her intentions. Finally, he nodded, gesturing toward the ground beside him. "Help yourself." Not many folk venture this far out, without a good reason. The woman settled down cautiously, her movements deliberate. After a brief pause, she introduced herself. "Name's Clara Hayes. Well, let's just say I've been following whispers. Whispers that lead me here to your land." Ezekiel raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Whispers? What kind of whispers?" Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Whispers of gold. Of a vein so rich it could change a man or a woman forever. Some call it cursed, others blessed. But all agree it's hidden, buried beneath layers of mystery and danger." A flicker of recognition passed over Ezekiel's face. "So, the rumors persisted, even after the storm and the tragedy." He leaned back, stoking the fire with a stick. "You came all this way because of some tall tale spun around a campfire?" Clara shook her head, her expression serious. "No, Mr. Granger. I didn't come because of stories. I came because I believe there's truth behind them. And I think you know more than you're letting on." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. Finally, Ezekiel sighed, lowering the stick to rest against his knee. "Suppose you deserve to hear it," he said gruffly. "But what you do with the knowledge is on you." And so he began to recount the tale, not just of the golden vein, but of the forces that guarded it. He spoke of the men who had sought to claim the treasure, their greed blinding them to the warnings etched into the very fabric of the land. He described the storm, the fisher, and the price paid by those who dared to disrespect the sanctity of the earth. Clara listened intently, her gaze fixed on the flames as if they held secrets of their own. When Ezekiel finished, she remained silent for several moments, processing everything she had heard. Then quietly, she asked, "Why tell me this? Why not send me away like the others?" Ezekiel shrugged, though there was a softness in his tone that betrayed the hardness of his exterior. "Maybe because you don't strike me as the type who dig blindly without understanding. Maybe because you remind me of someone I used to know, a person who saw value in things beyond gold." Clara tilted her head, considering his words. "And what would you have me do, Mr. Granger? Walk away and pretend none of this happened?" He chuckled dryly. "That's up to you. All I can offer is advice. Respect the land. If you choose to stay, remember that every action has consequences. This place doesn't forgive easily." The two sat in companionable silence for a while longer, each lost in their thoughts. As the night deepened, Clara finally rose, brushing off her coat. "Thank you for sharing your story, Mr. Granger. Whether I leave or remain, I'll carry your words with me." With that, she tipped her hat once more and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ezekiel alone with the fire and the echoes of her presence. Days passed, and Clara did not return. Yet Ezekiel noticed subtle changes in the ranch, small signs that suggested she had stayed nearby, observing, learning. Footprints near the creek, faint scuffs against the rocks where the vein lay hidden. He wondered what conclusions she had drawn, what choices she might make. Then one morning, as the sun climbed lazily into the sky, Ezekiel discovered a note pinned to the fence post. Written in careful handwriting, it read, "The land speaks if we listen. Its treasures are not meant to be taken, but shared. Perhaps the curse is not in the gold, but in our hearts." Below the message was a map, crude but precise, marking paths through the wilderness that led to places Ezekiel had never explored. It was a gift, a gesture of gratitude, and perhaps a challenge. Smiling faintly, Ezekiel tucked the note into his pocket. Whatever Clara's intentions, she had left him with something valuable, a new perspective. And as he gazed out over the horizon, where the black rock mountains loomed majestically against the blue expanse, he felt a renewed connection to the land, a bond strengthened by both tragedy and hope. Little did anyone know, the story of Ezekiel Granger's ranch was far from over. For in the Wild West, where legends were born and fortunes won or lost, the line between curse and blessing was thinner than most cared to admit. And sometimes, the greatest treasures were not found in gold but in the lessons learned along the way. The weeks that followed Clara's departure were marked by a quiet transformation on Ezekiel's ranch. The land, once barren and seemingly forsaken, began to show signs of life anew. Perhaps it was the subtle changes in how Ezekiel approached his work, tilling the soil with care, planting seeds with intention. Or perhaps it was something deeper, an unseen force responding to the respect he now gave the earth beneath his feet. Whatever the reason, green shoots began to push through the cracked earth, and the creek, which had been reduced a little more than a trickle, swelled slightly with fresh water. Ezekiel found himself drawn to the map Clara had left behind. Its markings were cryptic, leading to places he had never ventured. Curiosity gnawed at him, urging him to explore further. One morning, as the sun painted the desert sands in hues of gold and pink, he saddled Samson and set out, following the first path indicated on the map. The trail led him deep into the Black Rock Mountains, where the air grew cooler and the scent of pine filled his nostrils. The landscape shifted dramatically from the arid plains he knew so well. Towering pines stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with needles that whispered secrets in the breeze. Streams babbled over smooth stones, their waters crystal clear and inviting. It was a world apart from the harshness of the desert, yet it held its own kind of beauty, a beauty tempered by the ruggedness of the terrain. As he rode higher into mountains, Ezekiel encountered remnants of old mining camps, abandoned long ago. Rusting tools lay scattered among the rocks, and wooden structures, weathered by time and the elements, leaned precariously against the slopes. These were the ghosts of another era, when men had come seeking riches, and left with nothing but scars. Yet, amidst the decay, there was a sense of resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had dared to dream. It was near one such campsite that Ezekiel made a discovery that would alter his understanding of the land and its history. Nestled between two boulders, partially concealed by moss and lichen, was a small chest, its iron hinges rusted but intact. With trembling hands, he pried it open, revealing its contents: journals, maps, and artifacts that spoke of a people who had lived in harmony with the land centuries before the arrival of settlers. The writings were faded, some pages torn or water damaged, but they told stories of a culture deeply connected to the earth, revering it as a living entity worthy of protection. Among the items was a necklace, its beads carved from stone and bone, each one etched with intricate patterns. Ezekiel recognized the symbols. They matched those he had seen etched into the rocks near the fissure where the golden vein lay buried. A chill ran down his spine as the realization struck him. This was no mere coincidence. The land was not cursed. It was sacred, imbued with a power that transcended human comprehension. Returning to the ranch, Ezekiel spent countless hours poring over the journals, piecing together fragments of knowledge that had been lost to time. He learned of rituals performed to honor the land, of offerings made to ensure balance and prosperity. Slowly, he began to incorporate these practices into his daily routine, marking significant events with ceremonies that acknowledged the interconnectedness of all things. Word of the changes on Ezekiel's ranch spread through Redstone, though it took time for the townsfolk to notice. At first, they dismissed the greening fields and flowing creek as natural phenomena, attributing them to a rare bout of favorable weather. But as the seasons passed, the transformations became undeniable. Crops flourished where none had grown before, and animals returned to graze in the pastures. Even the air seemed fresher, carrying with it the promise of renewal. Curiosity eventually brought several townspeople to the ranch, including some who had mocked Ezekiel in the past. They came bearing questions, skepticism written plainly on their faces. But as they witnessed the vitality of the land, their disbelief gave way to awe. Ezekiel welcomed them cautiously, sharing what he had learned without imposing his beliefs upon them. Some listened eagerly, while others remained skeptical, unable or unwilling to embrace the idea that the land possessed a wisdom greater than their own. Among those who visited was a young woman named Lily, whose family had struggled to make ends meet since arriving in Redstone. She watched Ezekiel work with a mixture of admiration and intrigue, her eyes wide with wonder as she observed the harmony he maintained with the earth. Over time, she began to assist him, learning the ways of the land under his guidance. In her, Ezekiel saw a reflection of Clara, someone who understood the importance of balance and respect. Together, they tended the fields, planting crops that thrived beyond expectation. They repaired the barn and fences, using materials sourced locally, ensuring nothing went to waste. And when the rains came, as they inevitably did, the land absorbed them gratefully, replenishing its resources and rewarding their efforts tenfold. Yet, despite the progress, shadows lingered. Not all were content with the new order. There were those in Redstone who viewed Ezekiel's success with suspicion, convinced he harbored secrets that could be exploited for personal gain. Whispers circulated about the golden vein, reigniting old desires and fueling new ambitions. Tension simmered just below the surface, waiting for a spark to ignite them. One night, under cover of darkness, a group of men crept onto the ranch, armed with picks and shovels. Their intentions were clear, to unearth the treasure that had eluded them before. But as they approached the fissure, a strange phenomenon occurred. The ground trembled beneath their feet, emitting a low rumble that resonated deep within their bones. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the scene in stark relief. And then, rising from the depths of the fissure, came a presence, an embodiment of the land itself, vast and unyielding. The intruders fled in terror, abandoning their tools and leaving behind only their footprints as evidence of their trespass. When Ezekiel arrived at the fissure the next morning, he found no sign of them, save for the disturbed earth and the lingering aura of warning. Kneeling beside the fissure, he offered a silent prayer of gratitude, acknowledging protection the land had provided. From that day forward, Ezekiel became a guardian not just of his ranch, but of the broader region. He shared his knowledge freely, teaching others the importance of living in harmony with the earth. Some embraced his teachings wholeheartedly, while others remained indifferent or hostile. But regardless of their reactions, the land continued to thrive, proof positive that respect and stewardship yielded far greater rewards than greed ever could. And so, the legend of Ezekiel Granger's ranch grew, becoming a tale told around campfires and in saloons throughout the Wild West. It was a story of redemption, of finding balance in a world fraught with chaos. And though the golden vein remained hidden, its true value lay not in its material wealth, but in the lessons it imparted to those willing to listen. For in the end, the greatest treasures were not buried beneath the earth, but nestled within the hearts of those who chose to honor the land and each other